the drive, kicks it out Williams. Williams to the rack, high off the glass, it's good, he did it again. SGA taking his time. Lou Dort has it. Dort lines up, three-pointer. Bang! Lou Dort from downtown. Game one of the conference finals at Madison Square Garden. He can get hot. Williams has been hot all night, falling away. Got it! 40 points for Jalen Williams.
I just like listening to Mike Breen. Good job, Max, coming in. Mike Breen's as good as it gets. That broadcast, not so great, but Mike Breen is the best. Yeah, Jalen Williams last night had a night, as did Oklahoma City. They were just too much for the Pacers, especially considering Tyrese Haliburton played one of the worst games you'll ever see a star play in a spot like last night. Now, he did have an excuse. We'll get to that coming up. Good morning. Oklahoma City one win away. Try to say that fast 3 times. 1 win away from an NBA championship. The last time that franchise won it all, they were the Seattle Supersonics, and they knocked out the Washington Bullets in 5 games. June of 1979. That would be 46 years ago. Look it up if you think I'm making it up. Yeah, Washington's NBA franchise played in the NBA Finals, Max, 3 times when they were in Washington in the 1970s. Of course, they have not been close since. I've got a ton on last night's game coming up, including thoughts on what Rick Carlisle should have done about Tyrese Haliburton last night. But this from Fran to start the show. Fran was very upset, and I'm not going to read the entire email. Fran was very upset that I went off yesterday on the city council. It wasn't just the city council. It was all of them. It was the mayor's office. It was the city council. It was get it together and get this thing done by July 15th so the team can proceed in the timely manner and based on the calendar that they wanted when they came to an agreement on a term sheet with Mayor Bowser. Fran writes, and I'm taking just a part of this. Not sure why you took the side of Commanders ownership yesterday while being uber critical of the city council. These are very complex negotiations, and time is necessary. I don't care how long it takes. I just want them to get it right. Be patient. Well, thank you for that, Fran. I want them to get it right, too. I do. I want them to get it right. I want them to get the best possible deal for the city because I'm a resident of the District of Columbia, and that's their job, to do what's in the best interest of their constituents, do what's best for the people. And I understand that these are complex negotiations. I don't know where to compare the complex negotiations of putting together a stadium/city deal versus some other complex negotiations, like perhaps the ones that were going on for 60 days with Iran. I don't know. I just know that when they struck the deal, there was one job left, and that was for the city council to vote on it and to pass it by July 15th. Now, if they don't pass it, they don't pass it, and the team moves on. If they get a deal or if they are unable to get a deal that the city council can vote 7 votes out of the 13 council members, although I guess they're 12 right now, but they need 7 votes. But I would say that from April 28th, in which they had the term sheet, they had the agreement between the team and the city, and July 15th is ample time. We're talking about, 2.5 months when all is said and done. And I think that what frustrates me is just this idea that the city council can just push it back and they can vote on it in the fall, and that the team's urgency is not their urgency. Well, to get a deal done, it might be. Now, someone suggested to me, don't you think that the city council is just operating in a way in which they're trying to create leverage? They're talking to the team in terms of, hey, we're not in any hurry. You give us a better deal and we'll get to the table and we'll vote on this July 15th. Maybe. I would guess, and Fran, you're not going to like this, of the two groups, I would bet on Josh Harris and Mitchell Rales and Mark Ein to know how to kind of negotiate and play this out in public more than the 12 council members. Just a guess. But I think the line in the story yesterday that I didn't read when we were talking about this on the air, to me, says it all. Beyond what the mayor, said the team was, which was outraged that they may put this vote off past July 15th, that they were risking and sacrificing an exclusive seat at the table and $2.7 billion in private investment. But there was a line in the story later on that I didn't read from, and I just missed it. But this, to me, is what I insinuated or suggested might be the feeling of, Josh Harris, Mark Ein, Mitch Rales ownership. There's a paragraph that starts, the Commanders said they would be willing to work, quote, morning and night with the council to get the deal passed in July. Throughout the process, we've been clear. The team has been clear. They need a new home by 2030. Any delay will make us unable to deliver on that timeline, as well as prevent us from attracting major concerts, performers, and international events such as the 2031 FIFA Women's World Cup to DC. So the team is in that roll up your sleeves. We're willing to do it for, days in a row, morning and night, bring the coffee in. We're pounding this thing out. We're getting it done. Nobody's leaving the room until it is done. And that is typically the spirit of more private sector than bureaucratic government sector, entrepreneurial environments in which Josh Harris and Mark Ein and Mitchell Rales have thrived in and have been a part of. And I'm sure there's some frustration on their part that we're sitting here on June 17th, and there's the discussion among the city council that they're not ready to vote on it, and they may push the vote back. These guys probably would have had it done in a week had they been on the other side. That's all I'm suggesting. I could be totally wrong. It could be, Fran, that the city council is so shrewd, and they are ready to vote on this, and they're ready to vote yes on this by July 15th, but they're trying to create just a little bit more leverage to get just a little bit more out of the deal, get a little bit better of a deal, whatever that means. I don't know the details of the term sheet. We read it back in April. It's $2.7 billion from the team. It's $1 billion from the city, or something north of $1 billion. I just think 2.5 months is ample time. And if they end up pushing it back, it's unfortunate. It doesn't mean the team will walk. Maybe they won't. They want RFK. They want it badly, but they want to move forward with the beginning of this project so that they can open the stadium in 2030. By the way, here's another quick email that I read right before the show began. I just thought, and I'll get to the NBA Finals. I know you guys are waiting with bated breath. Kevin from Derek. Kevin, Jaden Daniels needs a running game, period. Every quarterback needs one. Without one, they will go back to being a non-playoff team. We've talked a lot about the need for others to be a part of Washington's run game next year, and we don't want Jaden Daniels leading the team in 10-plus games in rushing. That's probably not the best formula for trying to win 12 games again. Let's not forget that Washington finished last year as the number 3 rush offense in the NFL. So, Derek, I get it, and I want them to be able to run the football and take the pressure off the quarterback. And, the quarterback had all the pressure on him anyway, even being able to run the football. And I want the 150-plus rushing yards a game to come from a lot more of the others than just, 90 yards from the quarterback and another 60 combined with 2 or 3 running backs, along with a wide receiver on a fly sweep or a reverse. But they were the number 3 rush offense in the NFL last year. Baltimore was 1, Philly was 2, Washington was 3. It's interesting. Tampa was 4, Green Bay was 5, Detroit was 6. The top 6 rush offenses in the NFL last year were all playoff football teams. Yeah, we'll have plenty of time to talk about this leading up to the season. I don't know that we're going to know much until the season starts, but what we do know is that they got better along the offensive line. So that should be a factor in helping the team become an even better rush offense than they were last year. But don't forget, this team ran the football. Yes, with the quarterback a lot of the time, but they rushed the football last year to the tune of the 3rd best rush offense in the NFL. All right, let's talk about NBA Finals Game 5 last night. I was pumped up for the game. I'm going to give you this overarching thought as I watched the game last night. I thought the game was tired and sloppy for a lot of it, unlike the first 4 games. The intensity was still there. The defensive pressure was still there. But I think if you've watched this series, you can see the physical effect that the intense, in-your-face, full-court pressure defense in each of these games, you can see the effect it is having on both teams. They are both physically worn down a bit. And the game started actually in breathtaking fashion. Both teams were on fire. I think 12 of the first 14 shot attempts were converted. And it looked like maybe we're going to have a night in which offense reigns supreme. But that's not what happened. Both of these teams got back to playing really good defense, Oklahoma City in particular. I've talked about this a lot. Oklahoma City is one of the best defensive teams I've ever watched play basketball, period, at any level. I would say UNLV's college team in 90 and 91 was the best defensive college team I've ever seen. In the NBA playoffs, these Oklahoma City Thunder this Oklahoma City Thunder team are comparable to some of the Bulls defensive teams, some of the Pistons bad boy teams. They are just so good, and they are so deep. They can play up to 10 guys, and all of them can defend. There just isn't any weakness defensively, and they all can defend any of the 5 positions. You see Isaiah Hartenstein, a center, out guarding Tyrese Haliburton. Same with Chet Holmgren. They just can guard any position 1 through 5, which makes it very difficult to run offense. But Indiana's proven that they can run offense and they can score even against great defense. It's been one of the compelling features of the series is that we're watching one of the great defensive teams of all time, and yet Indiana's been up to it in a lot of the games. You know, they've been able to score. They've been able to get buckets because they're really good. You know, this series was a series that I thought would be easy for Oklahoma City. I picked them in 5 and said worst case 6. May end up being 6, but it's not the 6 that I thought. I thought they were a much better team. They're not a much better team. These teams are very equal. And even last night, where Oklahoma City seemed like the better team for the majority of the night, it was a 2-point game early in the fourth quarter. Indiana just doesn't go away. And they didn't last night. And then to 2 at 95-93, 5 of the next 7 defensive possessions for Oklahoma City ended with a theft, with a steal. I mean, there was incredible ball pressure. You may say they were ugly turnovers. No, they were defensive forced, and they were called steals. They had 15 steals in the game, 5 over that 3-minute stretch in the fourth quarter where they went from up 2 to up 14-15. They can throw the D on you like nobody can. And they were so disruptive. Part of it was Tyrese Haliburton's ineffectiveness. I'll get to that in a moment. But you can't talk about last night's game and not talk about Jalen Williams and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. There was a lot of talk about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, as good as he was in Game 4, and he basically strapped the team to his back offensively in the fourth quarter, brought him back, and they won Game 4. That was the crucial win for sure. But they talked about that he had 0 assists in that game. Well, if you go back and watch that game, he had 0 assists because they were 3 for 17 from behind the arc. He should have had 5-6 assists with wide open looks that he created for his teammates. They just didn't make the shots. Last night, they were 14 of 32 from behind the arc, 43.8%. So he ended up with 10 assists. Sometimes it's not, the player that's responsible for his low assist total. It's the players that he passed the ball to that didn't make the wide open shots that he created by collapsing the defense. And I think that was a part of why he had 0 assists in game 4. They won game 4 shooting poorly. Last night, they didn't shoot it poorly, and Jalen Williams was outstanding. I've been a bit critical of him at times during this series. I thought his first few games were games in which he was going to have to get better, or they were going to, be in a dogfight. He was in those first 2 games 11 for 33 from the floor, and he was forcing things. And he had, stretches of those games in which, you go to game 3, just too many turnovers, ugly turnovers. But last night, his athleticism, his ability to get to the rim with his athleticism, his first step, his explosiveness, his overall ability to close at the rim. I mean, I've felt this watching Oklahoma City throughout the postseason. It's really hard to stop Jalen Williams from getting to the rim if that's what he wants to do without doubling him and forcing him to give it up. I don't think that he's always that great in his ability to see the floor when the defense does crowd him. But when the spacing's right and there is room for him to go downhill, he's borderline unstoppable. He had 40 last night. That's an incredible game 5. He was 14 of 25. He was 3 for 5 from behind the arc. He got to the free throw line. He had missed free throws in previous games. He was 9 for 12 last night. Had 6 rebounds, 4 assists, and didn't turn the ball over, last night. Actually, he had 1 turnover. And then Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, SGA, I thought had a bit of a sloppy night at times, especially through the first, second into the third quarter. Had 3 or 4 turnovers that just him trying to squeeze through tight openings. I know he can do it. He brought the ball up against pressure too much last night. They got away from that in game 4, and I thought it helped him out a lot. Last night, he was back there, trying to beat full court pressure with the dribble. I don't think he should be doing that. I think they should leave that to Jalen Williams, to Alex Caruso, to anybody else, Dort. He was solid, though. 31 and 10 in a game 5. 4 block shots, by the way, for him as well. And he is deadly getting to the free throw line. He just doesn't miss. He was 13 of 14. You can talk about all the calls that he draws. I mean, you go back through the history of time. The best players in the game are really good at getting to the free throw line and drawing fouls. And yes, sometimes getting the benefit of the doubt on whistles. But to me, ultimately, despite 40 from Jalen Williams and 31 from SGA, they combined for 71. It was that moment in the fourth quarter when here comes Indiana. Here they come behind Tyrese Haliburton's replacement. We'll get to that in a moment. And they get a 3 from Siakam off an offensive rebound with 8.5 to go to make it 95-93. And from that point forward, they went from 95-93 to 112-97. A 15-point lead with 5 steals defensively over the next 7 Indiana possessions. You can talk about bad, passes, panicked, Nembhard and others. That's ball pressure forcing those bad passes that SGA picked off. Alex Caruso gets a steal, on a play in which he turns and he throws it backwards. They were rattled. The defensive pressure rattled them. That's why they turned the ball over. I've said this watching this series and watching Oklahoma City throughout. If your explanation for Indiana, or if your, projection is just don't turn the ball over and you can win, well, yeah, you can say that about anybody. But it's hard not to turn it over against Oklahoma City's defense. They had 23 turnovers. Last night, unlike game 1, when Oklahoma City didn't turn all those turnovers into points, last night, 32 points off 23 turnovers. But of the 23 turnovers, 15 were steals. Steals. Yeah, I could go back and find 3 or 4 turnovers that were unforced, but almost the significant majority are forced by Oklahoma City's defense. They're fun to watch, man. If you like watching great defensive basketball, Oklahoma City's an all-time watch. All-time. I think they'll win the series. It's not going to surprise me if Indiana wins Game 6 and we get a Game 7. But OKC was impressive last night. Look, a big story last night was the absolute brutal, I mean brutal, performance by Tyrese Haliburton, a player who's been as clutch as any in the postseason. Many have wanted to anoint him as a superstar. I've pushed back on that. I've said he's a really good player. He's a star player, but he's not at that level of superstar yet. I just haven't seen it. And watching him, there are too many games where you watch him and you're like, where are you? Now, last night, he had a reason for 0 field goals made in 34 minutes. We'll get to that when we come back. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, the team980.com. We're free and live on the Odyssey app. We're also on our YouTube channel. Just hit the subscribe button, hit the like button when you get there.
I miss NBA Finals. It's the finals, man. I've worked my whole life to be here, and I want to be out there to compete. Help my teammates any way I can. I was not great tonight by any means, but it's not really a thought of mine to not play here. If I walk, then I want to play. So they understand that, and is what it is, and got to be ready to go for Game 6.
So Tyrese Haliburton has a sore right calf. That's what he was playing with last night. I guess he had it coming into the game, and then he took a spill in the first quarter. That aggravated it. He left the bench, went back. I guess they put some stuff on it, ice, whatever, came back into the game and did not play well. It was a brutal performance by their star player. Tyrese Haliburton played 34 minutes. He did not make a shot in the game. He was 0 for 6 from the field. It's not enough shot attempts to begin with. 4 for 4 from the free throw line. Had 4 points. Did have 7 rebounds and 6 assists, but also turned the ball over 3 times. You could see there was no doubt he was compromised. He could not beat anybody off the dribble. He couldn't get around people, and it bogged that offense down. And the real issue for Indiana and for Rick Carlisle, in my opinion, is that TJ McConnell was awesome off the bench in replacement of Haliburton. He's been awesome pretty much for the entirety of the postseason. He's been a very good player in that point guard role, replacing Tyrese Haliburton and playing somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 or so minutes a game. He had 18 points off the bench last night in 22 minutes, 8 of 14 from the floor, 4 assists, 4 rebounds, 2 steals. They were just flat out much better with him in the game than they were with Tyrese Haliburton in the game. They made their run from at one point an 18-point deficit to a 2-point deficit in the fourth quarter because of TJ McConnell as much as anybody else. I think Carlisle made a mistake last night. Now, I want to read something. This will bring 13 years ago back to all of us, 12 years ago. Bobby writes, Rick Carlisle pulled a Mike Shanahan last night. He should have pulled Haliburton, but instead left him out there, put him at risk, and they lost the game. A good one, Bobby. Not exactly apples to apples, okay? Not exactly apples to apples. The Indiana coach knew that his player was hurt. The player left the game, got treatment for the injury, and put him out there. Let's not forget that in January of 2013, the quarterback, Robert Griffin III, lied about his injury. Also got, essentially help from the doctor saying that it was not his knee, it was the brace that was making him look lame in the way he was playing. Shanahan had Kirk Cousins ready to go in the second half, but they came out of a closet, the doctor and RG3 did, and they said, no, he's fine. We just had to fix the brace, and now the brace is in a good spot. He's ready to go. Look, in these situations, man, you're never going to get in a championship, one and done. This wasn't one and done last night, but getting close to it. You're not going to pull one of your 2 best players, maybe your best player, when he insists on playing and you're playing for something. This is not a January regular season game against the Cavaliers. This is game 5, 2-2. Now, I think last night, if you're watching and paying attention, they couldn't do anything with Haliburton in the game. They were really struggling. They were playing borderline 4-on-5 offensively. He could not beat anybody off the dribble. He couldn't break down the defense and make plays, make shots. He couldn't get a shot off for much of the night. And TJ McConnell was just playing lights out. It's tough to do, though, man. It's tough for a head coach to look at a guy that's basically been one of the 2 big reasons you've gotten to where you've gotten to, and he says he's good. He says he's ready to play. The doctors are probably looking at it and saying, it's your call, it's his call. You can go either way. You heard what Haliburton said. It's the finals. I've worked my whole life to be here, and I want to be out there to compete, help my teammates any way I can. I wasn't great by any means, but it's not really a thought of mine not to play here. If I can walk, then I want to play. Many of you would say, well, it's not his job to pull himself from the game. That's on the adult. That's on the head coach to recognize that he wasn't up to it last night. I'm not going to spend any more time comparing it to, January of 2013. Again, they had gotten there largely on the back of Robert Griffin III during the course of the season. And the head coach was essentially, misled in terms of what was going on. Now, a lot of you would say, we saw with our own eyes when they ran that read option and he was dragging his leg to the sideline. Yeah, we did see that. But the doctor said it was the brace. The quarterback said he was fine, lied about it being the brace. We have that video with him telling Trent Williams, don't say anything. I'm hurting bad, but don't say anything. Basically he thinks it's something else. Carlisle knew what it was, but it's still hard, man. Carlisle said it was clear that Haliburton wasn't 100%. Doesn't expect him to miss game 6. He said he wasn't 100%, but there are a lot of guys in this series that aren't. This is a lifetime opportunity. Not many guys are going to sit, even if they are a little banged up. If you're injured, that's a different story. But we'll evaluate everything with Tyrese and see how he wakes up tomorrow. By the way, according to Genius IQ, some sort of NBA tracking advanced service, Haliburton had 6 total drives in Game 5, the fewest in a game this postseason and tied for the second fewest in a playoff game in his career. Yeah, he just couldn't get by anybody. He didn't look right. I don't know. Maybe he is injured, and we'll find that out today, rather than just being banged up. But he was awful. He was god-awful. And he cost his team by being out there. There is no doubt about it. So you can look at it and you can criticize Rick Carlisle for not leaving TJ McConnell in there. But you can also recognize that, I'm dancing with the girl who brung me in this situation. And if he's banged up, I still believe that he could pull off some magic here at the end, and yeah, I think that's always a tough call. If literally there's an injury and they can't play and they can't move, that's one thing. He was compromised, no doubt. He was also, even before banged up, when he got banged up later in the first quarter, he didn't start the game well. He looked like it was going to be one of those nights where Haliburton becomes incredibly passive. He's had several of those games in the postseason where he just doesn't look to score. It's odd. Game 2, he had those meaningless 12 points in a blowout loss. He had 5 points going into the fourth quarter on like 6 or 7 shot attempts. He had a game against the Knicks. It was game 5 where he had 7 shot attempts and scored 8 points. In the series against Cleveland, he had back-to-back games of 4 points and 11 points where he shot just 8 times in each game. That's just odd. Sometimes the defense dictates that, understood, but that's the difference between stars and superstars. Defenses can try to get you to give it up, but a superstar is still going to get his somehow, some way. And Haliburton hasn't done that. I'm not blaming him for the game last night. He was clearly injured, but man, did his presence on the floor hurt his team, especially in that fourth quarter when they got it to within 2. McConnell would have been a better option for them down the stretch. Would they have won the game? I don't know. Oklahoma City's defense, although McConnell seems to be the least fazed by Oklahoma City's defense. He is the epitome of keeping the dribble alive and probing a defense with the dribble. I mean, you see him dribble all around that defense. He starts out on the perimeter. He goes to the wing. He goes to the baseline. He goes up and down the baseline looking to make a play. Yeah, he's a good player. I think they would have been better off. I still think probably Oklahoma City's defense over those final 8+ minutes would have been the difference. So here we are, 3-2. We got to wait until Thursday night for Game 6. It's probably best now that I think about it. These teams need these 2 days in between to recover and rest. These games are just, total tug-of-war, slugfests. They have been throughout. I think it's been wildly entertaining to watch. Can't wait for Game 6. The line is a bit short in Game 6. Oklahoma City was a 6.5-point favorite in Game 4. They were a 5.5-point favorite in Game 3. They are just a 4.5-point favorite in Game 6. That I think the public's been pounding Indiana in all of these games as an underdog. And now we've seen 3 of the last 4. So we're 3-3, I think, in terms of ATS, Oklahoma City against the spread. I think that's what it is at this point. But 4.5 is the lowest point spread we've seen in this series. But I would bet the public is still going to bet Indiana. They like the Pacers, and they like getting points in these games. All right. Michael Lee will join us from the Post at 11. We'll talk NBA Finals, and we'll look ahead to the draft with him as well. But I want to talk about a story that one of you sent to me yesterday that I read early this morning about Cliff Kingsbury. Really interesting story written about Cliff Kingsbury, and it makes you wonder what this franchise will be if they eventually lose him. That's next.
All right, the Oklahoma City Thunder take a 3-2 lead in the NBA Finals, winning 120-109. The Pacers cut the lead to 2 points in the fourth quarter, and it was all OKC from there with a 21-8 run to close out the game. Jalen Williams put up 40 points on 56% shooting. The Stanley Cup Final is tonight, and the Cup will be in the building. The Panthers are coming home with the chance to close out the Edmonton Oilers. That game will be at 8 p.m. on TNT. And the Nats, they fall to the Rockies after entering the ninth with a 4-3 lead. Kyle Finnegan gives up his first home run of the season to tie the game. Mickey Manaik hits the go-ahead home run. The Nats fall 6-4 and extend their losing streak to 9 games. They continue their series versus the Rockies tonight. First pitch at 6:45. Nats on deck with Charlie and Dave at 6:15 on 106.7 The Fan. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
Yeah, it's huge. I think you look traditionally through the NFL, the guys who've had a ton of success have been able to stay on those long-term, all-time greats, and just the comfort level, and then you being able to take the ownership of it and understand it inside and out, where now you're correcting people. You don't even need the coaches, and he's kind of getting to that point.
The voice of Cliff Kingsbury. A couple of you sent me a link to a story written by Tyler Dunn of golongtd.com. It was a long piece about Cliff Kingsbury. Thanks to those of you who sent it to me. I think Jack and Adam, I think, were the two people that sent it to me. Yeah. I'm going to read from it. I read it early this morning, and it's really interesting, and it speaks to the very, solid possibility that Cliff Kingsbury will be coaching the 2025 season as Washington's offensive coordinator for the final season. And by the way, what they might miss when he's gone. There's some of the stories in here that Tyler Dunn wrote about that we've heard as it relates to Cliff Kingsbury, but I thought it was worth sort of sharing. He writes at the beginning, good hair, it turns out, can backfire. When 6-2 and 10-3 seasons as the Arizona Cardinals head coach went haywire, there was Cliff Kingsbury's undeniable swagger front and center. Lazy narratives took hold. Memories raced back to the scene of Kingsbury's 2020 COVID draft war room. Remember that? When he was, essentially sitting on this white sofa in a beautiful place in Arizona with a beautiful view. And it looked like a GQ photo shoot, Tyler Dunn writes. Losses mounted, he continues. Kingsbury was fired. Conclusions were universally scripted in permanent marker. The coach was universally decried as too soft, too Hollywood for the big leagues. Never mind the fact that the Cardinals were run by one of the worst owners in sports and quarterbacked by a player who, while ridiculously talented, required an infamous homework clause in a contract worth $46 million per year. Yeah, remember when Arizona put in the required sort of take-home work for Kyler Murray into the contract? After getting fired, quote, Kingsbury bought a one-way ticket to Thailand and took a deep breath. I bet he did. In that moment, I immediately thought back, Tyler Dunn writes, to a conversation with one of Kingsbury's former quarterbacks at Texas Tech, a man who knows him extremely well. That man is Nick Shimonik. He backed up Patrick Mahomes before taking over as the starter. We chatted in 2020, and Shimonik couldn't help but steer that conversation about Mahomes back to Kingsbury. There's the obvious upside, the ability to relate to the modern athlete. Shimonik noted that the coach can talk about music, fashion. It was all a far, far cry from where the quarterback's collegiate career began at the University of Iowa. Kirk Ferentz was the exact opposite. He is so old school, so by the book. It's hard to have a true relationship with him unless you're an offensive lineman, Shimonik said. Then came the surprise. Shimonik noted that Kingsbury is old school where it matters most. He'd get to the Texas Tech facility at 3:30 a.m. each morning and wouldn't leave until 8:30 p.m. By the way, that kind of work ethic, we'd have a vote from the city council at this point. He wanted other coaches to arrive by 5 a.m., so he'd stroll in an hour and a half earlier. The common sight was Kingsbury drenched in sweat from a full workout by 4:30 a.m. After this, he'd watch film, conduct meetings, go back to watch film by himself, conduct quarterback meetings, then return for a third round of film. The way he views the game, Shimonik said, is very old school. The way he interacts with players and coaches in the building is very new school. It's a blend of both. He puts the time and effort in, and he's not going to ask anything of anybody that he wouldn't personally do. It can take a while for reality to slay perception, but the NFL world is finally wising up to the real Cliff Kingsbury. As the Washington Commanders offensive coordinator last season, he helped a rookie quarterback take the league by storm. And now the scintillating Jaden Daniels only trails Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and Joe Burrow in offseason MVP odds. The Commanders scored 28.5 points per game, and new heroes emerged weekly as Daniels led 4 fourth-quarter comebacks. Surely there are other coaches on the cusp of their own breakthrough season in 2025, too. And then he talks about, Belichick. He talks about Belichick in Cleveland and, basically a reputation getting attached to Belichick is too old school, too, not able to communicate with players. And he relays a story that it takes us to a story that was told by Leroy Horde. Remember him? He was a running back, and he played for both the Browns and the Ravens back in the 90s, but played for Belichick. And Horde said that Belichick wasn't shy in explaining to us why he believes the best head coach. Oh, I'm sorry. Horde said the best coaches often need time than public scrutiny allows. And he said that Browns players back then were always stunned by Belichick's football acumen. During pregame, Horde told the story of his head coach giving every single one of his players a specific tip about a specific player they'd face that day. Externally, Belichick was the cantankerous dolt who went 6-10, 7-9, 7-9, 11-5, and 5-11 as the Browns head coach from 91 to 95. And became almost a punchline when he left. And then he writes, Kingsbury always had a pinch of Belichick to him. Back in 2003, he was drafted by the Patriots in the 6th round, Cliff Kingsbury was. He never sniffed the field his lone season with the club, but even then, he made his time count. He served as a pseudo-quality control coach, splicing up video all the time for Belichick and Tom Brady. He'd research what teams did on 3rd and 10 plus, 3rd and medium, 3rd and short. The Patriots won their 3rd of 6 Super Bowls that year. Because he was so bright and he was so brilliant, they wanted him to be involved in some capacity, Shimonik said. The time and energy he's put into it is literally second to none. And then they go on, Tyler Dunn does in this story, to write about, Kingsbury's incredible work ethic and the amount of plays. They talk about that he literally watches every single offensive snap for every NFL team weeks 1 through 17 in the off season to try to learn, and try to find things. He at Texas Tech had a trick play called up that he said he got from the New York Jets in week 3, the NFL's prior season in a game against the Cleveland Browns. He had it as play 46 among all the plays that he went through during that season. His research, Tyler Dunn writes, goes deeper than the NFL, too. On his desk at Texas Tech were stacks upon stacks upon stacks of yellow legal notepads full of play diagrams. They talk about how he pulled plays from Bowling Green versus Montana State just as easily as he would from Chiefs Bills. And now they write, now that he's teamed up with an athlete and a worker in Jaden Daniels, wired the right way, we're seeing the best of a coach who wasn't good enough in Arizona. He's basically implying there that Kingsbury with a quarterback wired the same way and Kyler Murray wasn't. We're now seeing the greatness of Kingsbury. He writes, all a massive credit to Dan Quinn, a Grand Slam hire who built an exceptional staff across the board. And then he finishes it up. Actually, this is where I'm going to finish up reading from his story. You can find it, as I mentioned, at golongtd.com. Fresh off its shocking run to the NFC Championship game, Washington is positioned to realistically compete for a Super Bowl this season. And come 2026, a floundering organization would be wise to give Kingsbury his own second chance as a head coach. He's going to get that chance. I guess he had that chance had he really wanted it at the end of this year. But he wants another year with Jaden Daniels and didn't like necessarily the opportunities that perhaps were there for him. New Orleans as a possibility, maybe the Raiders as a possibility. Remember, the Raiders were on the verge of hiring him to be the offensive coordinator before Dan Quinn got hired here. Without Dan Quinn getting hired here, Kingsbury is probably not here either. So you have to consider that, the best combinations tend to be offensive head coaches, quarterbacks, having that combo. Washington has a great head coach. I believe he's a great head coach. He's certainly a very good head coach in Dan Quinn. But Kingsbury was a big part of last year's success because Jaden Daniels was a big part of last year's success. What happens when Kingsbury takes a head coaching job? Well, remember, Washington has really developed a deep coaching staff, and guys that they have in their building right now are, watching Cliff Kingsbury work. And they think whether it's a David Blau or whether it is, a Bobby Johnson or a Brian Johnson or an Anthony Lynn who's been a head coach before or a Tavita Pritchard, that they have that replacement in the building. Some of you suggested, I remember last summer, they did a great job hiring a staff, and they've already hired, this is brilliant, already hired Cliff Kingsbury's replacement. After he has great success in the upcoming season, if he gets a head coaching job, they've got his replacement somewhere in the building. People are very, very bullish and optimistic about David Blau's career. I mean, he is considered to be an up-and-comer, and they kept him in this offseason. I thought it was interesting last year before we saw one snap from an NFL season that people were already talking about the incredible depth they had built out among the staff, but they did. And hopefully when Kingsbury moves on, which seems like at least an even money bet, if they have anywhere near the level of success that they had last year offensively, and I don't know why they wouldn't. They wouldn't if the quarterback gets injured. But Kingsbury will get another shot. I think I said this when they hired Cliff Kingsbury. Guys like Scott and Stanford Steve, who know so many college coaches and so many people in college football. I remember both of them, reaching out to me to say, "Oh my God, Kingsbury, that's an incredible hire." And I'm like, "Really?" People in the business have spoken about Cliff Kingsbury's talent, his creativity, and his work ethic forever, not to mention the fact that everybody likes him and considers him to be a real high-quality guy. We could be looking at the final season of Cliff Kingsbury as the OC. And, as organizations flourish and have success, which we are not used to around here, there are moments, where let's just fast forward. Let's say they do really well in 26. He gets a head coaching job somewhere else. And in 25, they do really well. 26, he's somewhere else, and they're not as good offensively. You end up having those conversations about what they really missed. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but it's a story that I only read from, 30% of, that's worth going back and reading. It's golongtd.com, and you can find that story by scrolling down. I'll actually retweet it at some point today, but really good story about Cliff Kingsbury. All right. Michael Lee covers the NBA for the Washington Post. He'll join us next. One game away from the franchise's first NBA title since the franchise was in Seattle. They won the title in Seattle back in 1979, beating the Washington Bullets in 5 games. The second consecutive year they faced the Bullets in the NBA Finals. That's a long time ago for most of you, and it is in a completely different lifetime for the majority of you. Joining me right now to talk NBA, not necessarily Wizards today, but is Michael Lee. Michael Lee's been a reporter for the Washington Post for years. At Mr. Michael Lee on X, on Twitter. So, I've talked about this series in the NBA playoffs probably far too much for the betterment of the show because not everybody's into it. But when I have people like you on, I like to just start by asking for you to kind of describe the NBA Finals from your perspective, because you're a hoops guy. You love it like I do. So if you were telling somebody who hadn't watched any of the first 5 games about the NBA Finals, how would you describe them?
Wow, that's tough, man, because you put me on the spot, because I do love the NBA. I love basketball, but I don't necessarily love this series.
Really?
And I've been banging my head trying to figure out why. There've been 3 really good games, and there've been 2 kind of duds. Like last night was a dud. And so I have tried to convince myself that I should care about the finals because it's the finals, but it's a tough one to really wrap your head around, because there's no reason to really care unless you're really invested in the story of these guys. And I think that one of the things that's missing from these finals, and that's missing from the NBA in general in terms of its coverage and just how the network partners promote the sport, is there isn't enough of a reason for a casual fan to care about the results that are happening on the court. And I think that that's because there's not enough storytelling for us to care about the characters that are involved. I was just thinking about it last night when I watched the finals. Like, we have an MVP. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is the MVP of the league. And if you stopped 10 people on the street and asked them about him, there might be 3 who heard of him. And that's not because of him. It's not because he's not a great player. It's because we don't do enough to really make people care about these guys outside of what they do on the court anymore. We don't. If you're not invested in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's story, how would you know about it? How would you learn about it? These finals should have been an opportunity to really show people who he is, what he is, how he got here, and really explain why we should care about him. And that's been missing. There's a void in terms of our coverage, in terms of how we embrace the
who
NBA.
do you blame that on? Do you blame that on ESPN, ABC, the network?
Yes, absolutely. Because I remember as a kid, and I'm not trying to get all nostalgic and say, oh, this is better back in the 90s. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying that there is a responsibility that as a partner, that when you have a pregame show and you have 30 minutes of everyone's time, that you just don't have 30 minutes of guys talking about just whatever. And not really like offering any insight, but just saying so-and-so's got to play better, or so-and-so's got to show up. Like, we want to know, like, why do we care if they show up? Like, tell me about these guys. Tell me their stories. Tell me Jalen Williams' story. He had 40 points last night. And I guarantee you, if I thought those same 10 people that asked about Shai, none of them have heard of Jalen Williams. And that's not Jalen Williams' fault. But there's not enough that's being told about why you should care about these guys. And I just remember, just as a casual fan, if I'm just talking to non-basketball people, if I talk to my friends that cover a league and talk about basketball, we can go all day about the ins and outs, the intricacies and nuances, and, the defense they're playing, the adjustments that Dagnall made in Game 4, to get Shai open and all stuff. That's all fine and dandy. But when you have a league that historically has been about promoting its stars and promoting its players, and then all of a sudden you have a finals product that does none of that, outside of saying so-and-so has to play good or so-and-so is really good, but you're not really explaining how they got to be this good. And I think there's so many compelling things that could be told if we actually invested in storytelling. There are writers, great writers all over the country that are doing wonderful jobs of telling the stories of these guys. But if you're not invested in it as a fan, like I am, you're not going to know. And I'm trying to figure out how do you draw in an audience to care about these games, especially when you don't have the marquee teams, you don't have the marquee personalities, you don't have the marquee stars. How do you get people to care about the game? Well, you got to tell them about who they're watching. You got to help them understand why we should care. And I think that that's been missing. I'm not a ratings guy. I don't really care about ratings. I care about the product, but I also feel like it's just something missing. Like I feel like I'm watching more out of obligation and out of duty than out of a really desire to be entertained by what I'm seeing.
All right. Well, I want to come back to the basketball conversation in a moment because we're going to disagree on that. But I think this is really interesting. And every time I have you on, you end up talking about something that I didn't anticipate talking about, which is why I like having you on. Why do you think? Because you're right. When you get to championship time in any sport, you certainly have the opportunity to attract the casual fan, the casual sports fan. And when you get to those moments, and we see it Super Bowl week and Super Bowl day with the hours and hours of pregame.
You know the kicker story by the time you get to the Super Bowl.
Exactly. So why do you think ESPN hasn't gone down that path?
And that's something I've asked my friends that work at ESPN. Like, I'm like, what's going on? Like, why isn't that something that? Because I feel like the way they tell the NFL story is much different than the way they tell basketball story, and I don't quite understand why it's that way. Like I feel like, you know, if you're watching the Super Bowl, like last Super Bowl, you saw Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts, and you've seen them play in the Super Bowl against each other before, but you still could learn something about them in the pregame show because you sat down either with an interview or you did a feature on them or some aspect of their lives. I think that'd be important. Like I honestly feel like the one thing that's missing from, like, say, these finals. Like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, we just talked about, you know, as MVP. But there isn't any talk about, like, this guy played in the Olympics last fall. His team came up short what they expected. And he's been motivated all season by that. Like, that's been one of the main things that's been driving this magical season that he's been having, is that he was angry with how he performed, you know, for Team Canada, and that they didn't come up with at least a gold or a silver, which is what he wanted out of that experience. And so he's been motivated by that. But you don't even hear that mentioned. Like, you don't even know, like, his family story, like how they even got to Canada. Like, you know, and I think those are things that if you want to just sell your product, you can do it. I wish I knew the answer.
How did he and his family get to Canada?
I'm assuming they immigrated.
Okay.
You know,
I didn't know. I thought you sounded like you had a story to tell.
I should know that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, in turn, like, this is the MVP of the league. This isn't some random guy. This is a guy who averaged 30 points a game for 2 years in a row. This is a guy.
Well, there's a Canadian angle to this finals. I think we've got 4 Canadians in this series that are major contributors. That would have been a Super Bowl game day story for sure. I'm with you. You know, I
feel like they put too much weight on, you know, like print journalists, you know, like, you know, that cover the teams. And like I said, I'm not faulting anybody that writes about the NBA, because a lot of these stories have been told. Like I'm telling you, because I read it about, you know, the Olympics and how that has motivated him. And, like, I read that. But the casual fan hasn't read that. Or they probably didn't even know he played in the Olympics last year, because we didn't even care about the Olympics, you know, other than just Steph, LeBron, and KD were playing together. And that's all we really cared about. But I think that these are things that, you know, when you have an opportunity and you have an audience, I think it's an obligation to really try to promote the product, but also promote the players, and not just promote the personalities that are on these broadcasts. And I think that's where ESPN is missing, is that they are promoting the personalities who are broadcasting the games more than they are the personalities that are performing on the court.
Yeah, it is a bit of, you know, a Stephen A. Perk, you know, et cetera, you know, show. And, you know, look, they're trying their best to compete with the gold standard in all of this, which is the TNT, you know, group for all these years, and it's just never going to work. Look,
you can't, and plus that TNT crew, because even if they don't do that, they make you laugh. They keep you entertained. Yeah. But I think that when you're broadcasting the games, and you like, I think that there's an element that's missing. And for me, as somebody who's watching these games, I'm like, if I didn't care about basketball, why would I care about watching these games? And I can't really give an answer.
I think there's an answer to it, and I'll get to that in a moment. But, you brought up something, and I noticed something last night because I have watched, a lot of the coverage pregame, the games, a lot of the postgame. I think my best friend in the world, Scott Van Pelt, does a phenomenal job, actually, in the postgame on ESPN.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
In his interviews. But I noticed something last night. I don't know if anybody wrote about this or picked up on it, but they carried the introduction of the teams, which made it feel a little bit bigger. People have complained that there are no NBA Finals decals on the court, that it looks like a regular season setup. So there is some of that I agree with, and I don't know the answer as to why they didn't treat this like it is. Like it should be treated, which is the biggest stage, the biggest product, and their best opportunity to draw new eyeballs to their sport.
And I think because you think during the World Series, you always have that all the players get announced. Game one, it's like the home game, first home game. It's like a magical moment, and you can see the players and how they take it all in. Like, oh man, this is the World Series, and like it sinks in for them. And like I think fans are begging for that. Like they don't have the logo. Because they had to basically bully the NBA to put the logos, the fake, the LED logos on the LED logos on the court and all that. And then they bullied them into having the announcements for before Game 5 because fans want to have a reason to believe that why should I care about these games? But I think it sort of goes back to the fact that they don't have a reason to care about the games otherwise. Like it was like unless we say, hey everybody, this is important. And I think that in some ways the NBA sort of, or even ESPN, didn't have to rely on building up momentum of interest in these games because you had a LeBron there, the easy sell, you had a Steph there, kind of an easy sell. So you had the superstars, the best players were out there on the court. And now you have a Shea who's a superstar, but nobody has any connection to him. No casual fans cares about him. So now it's like, what do we do to sell this product? Because we don't.
They better figure it out, Michael, because we're going to be here in a stretch of several years of having, these new stars. SGA leading the way, Jalen Williams leading the way. I'm with you. We're talking to Michael Lee from the Washington Post. I think your point is a good one, especially as it relates to this matchup, that they should have done a better job of what, let's face it, for many years, the NBA did the best job of, which is marketing its stars. And they didn't do it. But let's talk about the basketball because that's where you started. I agree. Last night's game I felt was a bit sloppy and a bit tired physically. I think the physical nature, the defensive nature of the first 4 games, you're starting to see some physical wear and tear, literally with Tyrese Haliburton.
Yeah, with Tyrese, yeah.
But my reason for watching it is I love basketball, and I'm going to watch it regardless. But you see the highest level of urgency and competitive, just there's something about when you're playing for a championship and you've got 2 teams who I think are really good teams. I think this Oklahoma City team's as good defensively as any team I remember watching. And I've enjoyed it, but it sounds like you haven't enjoyed it. Expand on that a bit.
Well, I'll say that, game 1 had a good finish. It had a good last 7 minutes. But up until that, it was pretty hard to watch. Like it was like, man, are they gonna compete? Oh, here they go. Here we go. Now we're going. And then game 2 was just that was a dreadful game. That was just a dreadful game. 3 and 4 were good games. They were entertaining games.
Yeah.
And then game 5, it's like, okay, we've had 2 good games. Let's have another good one. And it was like, oh man, you gave us another dud. And so
we haven't had a classic.
Yeah, well, game 1, I mean,
game 1 was a stunner. There
hasn't been once the bell rings, we duking it out into the finish. It's been like, somebody takes a big lead and somebody comes back and steals it, kind of thing. But I do think that I've been very impressed by Jalen Williams and the way he's come on, the last couple games, and especially the last 2. For him to get 40 points, and it's, he's still in his rookie deal, and he's not really, he doesn't get a lot of acclaim, a lot of praise. And again, a lot of people don't know his story. But I think that he's been excellent, because I thought that he's come a long way from the Denver series. I thought he had a bad series against Denver, but he's really picked it up since then. And he's really given Shea a running mate, through this finals run, because it's not just a one-man show. And I think he stepped up in a huge way. I'm disappointed that Tyrese is hurt, because if he's just going to be a decoy, like he was last night, and just out there on the floor, like really doing nothing but throwing the ball away, then that's just not fun, And so I think the one thing that you want to see is, if you have a star on one side and he's delivering, you want to see somebody else on the other side kind of punch back. And I didn't really see that from Indiana. And that was what disappointed me last night. And I'm not blaming, Tyrese on being injured. Like that's part of the game. But it would have been nice if he's healthy and we could actually see him compete, because I don't think he's necessarily a superstar. I think he's a really good player in a really good system who can really have some great moments and performances at special times. But if he can't summon the energy for like a moment, it's going to be a tough watch.
Yeah, what you said about Haliburton is exactly what I've said. I think he's a really good player. He's a star. He's just not a superstar player. But, I suggested, and this is a hard call for Rick Carlisle, because Haliburton's been so special at, in fourth quarters, with games on the line throughout the postseason. But they were just much better with McConnell in the game last night. In hindsight, they should have kept McConnell in there.
Yeah, McConnell should have closed. He actually did when they were down 20, but he should have been on the court when the game was really, getting away from them, because again, he was just bringing that energy and that fight, and that's what they needed. They needed somebody who's just going to add a little grit. Tyrese was just out there. Like, he's like, okay, I know I'm going to tough it out, but sometimes, just going out there and performing is not enough. Like, we need you to play at like Tyrese Haliburton. If you're just going to be out here, you're not helping, especially defensively, because now we're missing assignments, and we're leaving Jalen Williams wide open when he's the guy getting all the buckets. And so, you could just see it starting to wear down on them mentally, because they were so discombobulated on defense that they were just throwing the ball away on offense, because they felt like they were rushed and hurried to try to respond to what Oklahoma City was doing. TJ should have definitely been out there, because, and sometimes, and I think Tyrese would have understood it too, because he didn't have it. Like, he did not have it physically to go out there and play the minutes that he played.
Yeah, it was awful.
I don't think he would have taken offense to Rick benching him, if that was the case, because it's not like he's being benched because he can't play, or he's not good enough. It's just he was incapable of performing at the level they needed to win that game, and so I think that he'll look back and maybe going home, maybe a couple of days more rest, he can come back and kind of give him something, or kind of get that lick back, for not showing up or not being able to perform. I won't say not showing up, just not being able to perform. And when it mattered, maybe he can, kind of give him something, in game 6, to kind of even it out, because he just wasn't able to do it.
We're talking to Michael Lee from the Washington Post. Last night, other than the fact that I bet Oklahoma City laying 9, and I didn't want the close game, I have kind of wanted a signature moment in this series. It was game 1 for sure, but games 3 and 4, I really felt like were heavyweight, knockdown dragouts from the beginning that just didn't end. Yeah, it didn't end with the drama that it seemed to be building towards. And I think you need that. There's no doubt. Maybe we'll get that in games 6 and 7 if we get there. How do you think this ends?
If Haliburton is going to look the way he did last night, it ends game 6. But if he can come back and just, give him, one, just I got to tough it out and play my hardest and just give him my all, I think it's going 7. And, I had going in, I had Oklahoma City winning in 7, even though I thought I was leaning towards the Pacers, because I thought that people were really sleeping on the Pacers, and like people were saying Thunder in 5 and stuff. I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't see that. Like, mainly because there's a process that usually kind of unfolds for young teams when they have to break through and win a championship.
Yeah.
It's rarely you just walk in that first time and you just destroy somebody unless you have an opponent that's just weak and just not really worthy. But usually it takes a while for you to figure it out. Either you lose that first time or it takes some rough games to kind of get over it, and then you finally finish. I think Oklahoma City, based on the fact that Tyrese is not 100%, they should be able to close. But I just feel like if Tyrese just gives them, what's the stat? If he gets 20 points, they're unbeaten in the playoffs or something crazy. Like if he just gives them 20, not that it's easy, but if he gives them 20, they win. And I think he's going to do everything he can to try to give them that kind of performance. Because I know that he's a competitive guy. I know that he wants to win. And I think he knows that the reason why they lost is because they didn't have him. They didn't have him out there really giving it their all. So I had Thunder winning in 7, mainly because I just couldn't convince myself they were going to lose. But I do like the Pacers. I like what I've seen out of them all postseason. And I just love their grit, and I like Rick Carlisle. He's just such a great coach.
Yeah, great coach. Well, I was one of those that liked the Thunder in 5. I just thought, and
really?
What you said has been true our entire lifetimes, but they exceeded. Usually it's win a series, win 2 series, then get to the finals and lose, and then finally win it. They won a series, lost a series, and then skipped the next couple of spots to get to the finals, and they just looked like a dominant team. Although, and I said this to I think Legler the other day on the show, what's interesting is Denver had them. They had them in Game 4, they had them in Game 5, which really speaks to the greatness of the Joker, of Jokic. That with a bench so thin and with Porter Jr. injured, with Aaron Gordon injured there late in the series, that they actually took Oklahoma City to 7. But I like the Thunder too. And to your point, if Haliburton, can't play to the level that he's played at, I think this ends on Thursday night. Real quickly before I let you run, are you paying attention to the draft and the Wizards' number 6 overall pick? Do you have a preference?
No, I'm not paying that close attention.
Okay.
And I feel like, they're obviously in a best player available position. I don't think they can, feel like, oh, we have this position already filled. I don't think that anybody on their roster is like so good that you can't find somebody better. So I just feel like they just got to get the best talent available. I don't know who's going to be there at 6. It's disappointing that they weren't able to get one of those top 4 spots considering how awful their season was. They really got to hit, that when you're building through the draft, you can't have any slip-ups. You can't just have guys who are just okay. You really got to hit. And I think that's the one thing that has shown throughout history is like if you're going to build through the draft, you really need a player who you can, who can take you there. Yep. And they say this is a deep draft. We'll see how deep it is. But I think that, if they don't hit, they got to find a way to get more swings or more bites of the apple because you see what happened with Oklahoma City. Obviously, they've acquired all that draft capital, and then they wound up, getting the number 2 pick, and they hit on Chet. But they had Jalen Williams. They hit on him. And he wasn't a high lottery pick. He's late in the lottery. So you got to find a way to take advantage of all the picks you get, and you got to hit. You got to sneak a star in there. Yeah. But you really need a foundational piece. The Wizards don't have a foundational piece yet, I don't think. And maybe Sarr develops into something that I haven't seen yet, but right now I don't see that. And so I think they gotta really find somebody who can help elevate them this upcoming year. And that's a lot to ask for the 6th pick because you really don't. I'm trying to think of other 6 picks that turn with Brandon Roy.
Well,
maybe.
We've got later, in Giannis and Jokic and Kawhi. You can find that player, but to your point, and I've mentioned this many times over the years, you pretty much have to go back to the 2004 Pistons to find a team that didn't have a top 5 superstar leading the way. It's the way you win titles. I've had recent pushbacks on the 2014 Spurs because Duncan was sort of not, an obvious top 5 player that particular year, but we know what
But
Duncan
they also had four Hall of Famers on that roster.
Yeah, they did. And by the way,
like,
a young player in Kawhi Leonard, who was the NBA Finals MVP, who was just on the verge of becoming a superstar.
For sure.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Love our conversations.
On a different tangent. Sorry to get on a different tangent.
No. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I've seen some of the complaints. They've not treated this like it's the league's marquee product, and it is a lot of listening to a lot of self promotion with their network's stars as more of the angle rather than trying to find out a lot about a guy that is a superstar, but many people had never heard of him until the NBA Finals. Thanks.
Storytelling, man. There's value in it. There's value in it. So
thanks, Michael.
Well, have a good one.
Michael Lee at Mr. Michael Lee on X on Twitter. What makes this offseason the most unique in our conversations about the football team than we've ever dealt with? I'll talk about that next. Why does this offseason, in terms of the conversations that we have together about our football team, why is this year so different? It's obvious. We're not talking about the quarterback for the first time in forever. The conversations over the last 2 decades have essentially been quarterback. And then, of course, the thing that was always, lying underneath every conversation, ownership. But when it came to the actual football team, our off seasons, from the moment the season ends through free agency, through the draft, and then once they picked whomever it was going to be, was it good enough? Would it work? It was always about quarterback. This is the first time we're not talking about the quarterback. Last year, we were talking about the quarterback because we had expectations we were going to see something special, but we didn't know for sure. Some people didn't think we were going to see anything special. There was a real conversation about what Jaden Daniels was going to be, heading into his rookie season. There was no doubt about him being the starter, even though they didn't name him the starter until he had, crossed those milestones or the markers that they talked about. But this year, for the first time, you could say since 2016 or 2017, but for the most part, there's no conversation required about quarterback play. The conversation about Jaden Daniels is, have they put enough around him? Are they going to be better on defense? Is the offensive line going to be better? Did they add another weapon that'll help him? There is some sophomore slump conversation, but look at what we've gone through every offseason. The conversation has been dominated by quarterback. And by the way, it actually makes for better conversation this time of year. But it's great that it's not necessary. I mean, before last year, we had the Sam Howell conversation. I mean, he played in one meaningless game to end 22, and people thought he was the solution. Not everybody did, but there was a debate. The year before that, it was Carson Wentz. The year before that, it was Ryan Fitzpatrick. The year before that was the Dwayne Haskins opportunity. The year before that was Case Keenum and Haskins, who was drafted. The year before that was Alex Smith had gotten traded for. 17 was Cousins, but entering, his third year as the team's full-time starter, but more likely than not playing on a franchise tag, probably headed towards unrestricted free agency. 16, there was really no doubt. We thought we had a guy that was more than adequate to be a top half of the league starting quarterback because he had played that way in his first full year of starting. But in 2015, that summer, that offseason, RG3, Cousins, Colt McCoy, and then finally Jay made the decision on Cousins. 2014 was after the disastrous 2013 season. Will the new coach help the new quarterback? Will he resurrect, his career with Jay Gruden? 2013 was all in for week one. Of course, we were excited coming off of 2012. 2012 was the rookie year. 2011 was Beck versus Grossman. 2010 was McNabb. And we can keep just going back. This is the first year in forever that we're not talking about in the top 3 conversations about the football team, the quarterback. It's a great position to be in because it just means that the season upcoming has a much better chance of being successful because they found the quarterback finally. He is really good, if not great. I think he's great. I think he's top 5, top 6 worst case, but top 5 in the league. And it's really been about, well, what have they done to improve the team around them? What have they done to take advantage of this exceptional opportunity, a unique opportunity, a great quarterback on a rookie deal, but not just a rookie deal, but year 2 of a rookie deal, which means you have 2 full seasons of greatness at quarterback. on a rookie contract. Super unique. Sometimes it takes a year or two to take advantage of that rookie deal, but we found out early in his rookie season. But man, this is the first off season. I was thinking about this recently because, doing what people like me do, you're always trying to come up with this time of year, a decent conversation. Something, by the way, that can drive phone calls sometimes is part of the game. And quarterback always does that. Quarterback is the conversation that everybody can have and everybody believes they are an expert on. But we're not having those conversations this offseason. We're having conversations about a team that was 60 minutes away from a Super Bowl and will come back and head into 2025 with the highest expectations any Washington team has had in 25 years. That's not an exaggeration. 2000 was the last year in which the expectations entering a season were legitimately Super Bowl related. Those were the conversations in 2000. Off of a division-winning season in 99, a playoff win in 99, a very close divisional round 14-13 loss on the road at Tampa Bay, and they went out in Snyder's first full off season as an owner, and we certainly got a look at what it would become in those first 10 years in particular, which is watch how I can spend money on aging stars that won't provide a lot of value but might sell tickets. Bruce Smith, Deion Sanders, Mark Carrier, Jeff George, we know. But that team's over-under total heading into that season was 10.5. It's 9.5 this year. They had the second best odds behind the St. Louis Rams, who were the defending champs, to make it to the Super Bowl out of the NFC. They have the third or fourth best odds right now. This is the most anticipated, season with respect to winning this franchise has had in 25 years. They didn't have that after 2005. They didn't have that after 2012 because of the injury that RG3 was coming off of. They didn't have it after 2015, getting to the postseason, winning a division. They didn't have that after, what other season would we look at? 2020? No, they were 7-9 and won a division. But they have that this year. And, that is, a great position to be in for a fan base to have those kinds of expectations. And it's also, on one hand, really nice not to be sitting here having conversations and debates about, hopeful average quarterback play. So 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. Because the quarterback isn't the conversation as it's been for basically the last 2 decades in this format anyway, what's the conversation that you think is the most important about this team heading into 2025? What's the thing that you think we should be talking about the most as it relates to this team? It can be a positive, it can be a negative, it can be something very specific, it can be something very sort of, overarching. But what's the most important conversation for you heading into 2025? Because for the first time in forever, it's not the quarterback. 301-230-0980. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com.
All right, the Oklahoma City Thunder, they take a 3-2 lead in the NBA Finals by a score of 120-109. The Pacers cut the lead to 2 points in the fourth quarter, and it was all OKC from there with a 21-8 run to close out the game. Jalen Williams puts up 40 points on 56% shooting. The Stanley Cup Final is tonight, and the Cup is in the building. The Panthers are coming home with a chance to close out the Edmonton Oilers tonight at 8 p.m. on TNT. The Nats have fallen to the Rockies after entering the ninth with a 4-3 lead. Kyle Finnegan gives up his first home run of the season to tie the game. Mickey Maniac hits the go-ahead home run. The Nats fall 6-4 and extend their losing streak to 9 games. They'll continue their series versus the Rockies tonight First pitch at 6:45, and Nats on deck with Charlie and Dave at 6:15. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1, and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that's what's trending.
For the first time in a long time, we're talking about everything but quarterback. The quarterback conversation has been the dominant conversation for all of us during every single offseason for as far back as all of us can remember. And this year, for the first time, it isn't. So what is the most important conversation we should be having in your opinion about this team? 301-230-0980. I've said this many times, and there's not much to really, play out, because I think it's one of these conversations that doesn't get answered for sure until we see it on the field, because it's hard to even project. But the biggest conversation, the biggest question mark, the biggest if heading into 2025 is if the defense is better than it was last year, and if the defense is a lot better than it was last year, they've got a chance to win the Super Bowl in 2025. And they didn't do anything so major with respect to personnel in the offseason where you can definitively say they answered the how are we going to get better defensively question. We're just going to have to see if year two with largely the same group or some of the changes that they've made, the Kinlaws and the Goldmans and the Wises and maybe the Jordan McGee's in year two, Will Harris versus Jeremy Chin, how the hell is that going to play out? Are the corners a lot better? We're not going to know. We're certainly not going to find out in the preseason. These preseason games tell us nothing. The words that come out of the mouths of coaches and players tell us more than what we see with our own eyes in preseason games. Now, some of these, practices, joint practices, sometimes can be revealing. But to me, the biggest conversation, and it's very much a matter of opinion strictly on whether or not they did enough, or whether or not you're just, praying that year two, same system produces better outcome. But that's the important conversation, I think. It is different, though, when you're not talking quarterback. There is no doubt about that. Max, what do you think is the conversation that is top of list for Washington fans right now?
I mean, right now is obviously the Terry McLaurin thing. We just I still have faith it's going to get done, and it's just agents pumping out a bunch of crap. But it's definitely starting to creep its way into my mind that this could be the last year with Terry. I don't want it to be, nor do I genuinely in my heart of hearts think that it will happen. But the doubt that it is a possibility is creeping in there.
You answering the question that way is interesting, because it almost illustrates that there isn't an everyday conversation about the team. It's based on news. It's based on a report. It's based on, sometimes something you guys say. Whereas in the past, it was easy to talk about the quarterback and the quarterback situation almost every day. The Terry situation is a real situation. It's just that right now we know that they are at odds and there isn't a deal. And those conversations about a deal typically happen away from, our ability to kind of know, even reporters' abilities to know. And you don't find out anything until somebody gets pissed off or it gets done. 301-230-0980. What's the most important Washington football team conversation we should be having? Ross in Tampa, go ahead.
Kev, what's good in the hood, man?
What's up, Ross?
Too much going on. Hey, I changed my mind. I gave Max an answer. I'm going to pivot over. I think the most important conversation with the team now should be the stadium. Because I'm really looking. I was kind of hoping you talked a little bit more about that than the damn game last night. But I think that might be something that a lot of Washington fans, especially the ones who live in your region, are really going to keep their ears to the radio on. I'm looking forward to seeing what ends up happening. I just wish, Kevin, they would stop doing these press conferences. Everybody's raising their hands in the air, and it's not even official, kind of annoying. So that's where I'm thinking the conversation this summer would be the stadium. If not the stadium, maybe it is a situation where we're one step closer to a Super Bowl because, injuries happen. We went from a rookie quarterback with an average group of guys, aging veterans, to a second-year quarterback who knows the offense more, who's got the speed with the NFL, under his wings, with a slightly upgraded team, But, Kevin, you had said something earlier, which I kind of had a question about with the Kingsbury thing. If or when he leaves, I asked Craig Hoffman this last week. I wanted to know what you thought. I know they got a lot of coaches in waiting. What if things don't work out in Miami and they let go of Mike McDaniel? Would you be open to a potential reunion between he and Coach Quinn up in D.C.? I think his offense and Jaden Daniels' play style would be something to really enjoy.
Where were Quinn and Mike McDaniel together?
Atlanta, when Shanahan was there.
Oh, right. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think that they feel like there's a lot of talent on the staff, though. And I think that their preference would be to, promote from within, to create this opportunity in this organization where you come in, you got a chance to move up the ranks. If you're talented and you're good, Dan Quinn's going to give you a chance. So I think that would happen. Look, it's possible that the guy that they really want ends up getting another opportunity. I don't know how it'll play out. Mike McDaniel's a really good offensive mind and offensive coordinator. I don't know, though. Right. Kingsbury's better, I think. Thanks, man. Ross. Appreciate it. I got to get to a break. Rylan, Steve, everybody else on hold, stay there. We'll take a few more calls on this. For the first time in forever, the conversation this time of year is not about quarterback. It's the first time we haven't had quarterback at the top of the list of things to discuss in decades. So what is at the top of the list in terms of conversations about the football team that you think is the most important? Top of the list conversation. It's not quarterback. What is it? 301-230-0980. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, team980.com. You can watch us now on our Team 980 YouTube channel. Like it and subscribe to it when you get there. Bad night last night for the Nationals. They lost the first of 4 games against Colorado. Chelsea Janes joined me yesterday on my podcast. I'm going to play some of that for you coming up in about 15 or 20 minutes, talking about the Dave Martinez situation in particular. Right now, we are talking football team. Washington, for the first time, has a quarterback situation that does not require a lot of debate, a lot of consternation, a lot of angst, a lot of what ifs, a lot of I want another solution discussion. We don't have to talk about the quarterback. We understand that Washington, for the first time in many, many years, 3+ decades, has a legitimate upper tier elite level NFL starting quarterback. All these years of talking about the Sam Howells and the Carson Wentzes and the Taylor Heinekes and the Ryan Fitzpatricks and the Dwayne Haskins and the Case Keenums and the Kirk Cousins and et cetera. Alex Smiths. I mean, the list goes on and on. Beck versus Grossman. That was a year, huh? 2011. We don't have to have that conversation anymore. That's always been at the top of the list, other than owner-related topics. But the quarterback conversation's always been at the top of the list. It isn't this year for the first time in forever. So what is at the top of the list? What's the most important Washington football team conversation we should be having? 301-230-0980. I think the most, I don't know if it's the most intriguing, but I think it's the biggest question mark. Defense. They've got to be better on defense if they're going to actually compete to make a Super Bowl this year. They are talked about as Super Bowl contenders, but we know what they were on defense last year. We know that they relied on their quarterback to carry them to 12 regular season wins and 2 wins on the road in the postseason. Can he do that again with a less than average defense and a very poor run stopping defense? Would seem to be harder based on the schedule, based on, they got breaks that went their way last year in a lot of those games. That, to me, heading into the season, it's about how do they get to a Super Bowl? They get to a Super Bowl by being a much improved team defensively next year, because I have no doubt that offensively they're going to be very difficult to check in year 2. Ryland, go ahead. What's the most important conversation we should be having?
Morning, buddy.
Hey,
How
what's up,
relaxing is this, eh? What a treat. Oh, nothing, buddy. Just hanging in there. What a treat it is to have number 5 as a skin or a commander. He's the man. I would say the biggest conversation we need to be having is what about the weapons around our guy, number 5? Because without Terry and with a fatter Deebo Samuel, per se, will you have enough without those guys at their peak? And I think maybe we need to add to the running back room. Maybe I just saw a Breece Hall possibility. I don't know if that's a thing that we can make happen there.
Where did you see that? What did you see about Breece Hall?
Rather than working hard on my spreadsheets, I'm sitting here scrolling through Twitter or X, and I just saw something that popped up saying that he might be unhappy or something like that. So maybe we should make a phone call there, see what AP can make. But on the defensive side, I think with like a Kinlaw and a Lattimore, we got to wait and see, like you mentioned there, until the season's a go and see what those guys bring to the table. Because, as you mentioned, we didn't make too many big name splashes other than those guys. So those guys need to be performing. Another random thing I want to see, I'm just waiting for that uniform tweet, Kev. As a Canadian, I die-hard Redskins fan. I can't even believe the Commanders are still the name, but give us a spirit, give us something that kind of ties into the past, because hail to the Commanders ain't nothing, but, here we are.
Yeah, no, I know. That's always going to be, part of the backdrop, part of the conversation with a lot of us. Understood. I'm looking for Breece Hall stuff. There are still players out there, and we've talked about some of these players, thinking in terms of edge rushers. Zadarius Smith hasn't signed with anybody. Now that we're post OTAs, mini camps, where a lot of those veteran players would prefer to sign after those things take place. Jadeveon Clowney, Von Miller, Preston Smith, some of those guys are still out there. Breece Hall, I think, is a talent, no doubt. That would be a phenomenal fit, I believe, in Washington. I haven't really seen it. I'm reading now that there's the possibility they'll look to move on from him, but that's a trade. He's not a free agent. Let's go
Let's make a
to
move.
yeah. Thanks, Rylan. Appreciate it. Let's go to Steve in Columbia. Steve, since quarterback isn't the conversation as it's always been, what is the number one conversation related to the football team?
Hey, what's up, Kevin? And thank goodness we don't have to talk about that quarterback thing
Yeah.
again, at least. But I'm a little concerned about linebacker because I think it's a demanding position. And as Wagner gets older, I mean, obviously he's going to slow down. He knows where to be and what to do. And I just don't like the depth currently there. But I do. They're high on that guy, Matt McGee, or whatever his name is. Yeah, hopefully he comes through. And then the other area I'm a little concerned about is actually the offensive line up the middle, because that's where they got killed, in my view, last year, right up the middle. And I know, we have some new additions. Hopefully they will, be good enough to stop that from happening. And then I'm a little also worried about, like, the depth behind Terry. If something happened to him, who would actually step up at this point at receiver?
You got a lot of things that replace the quarterback conversation. To the offensive line, they really struggled when Tyler Biotish got hurt and got sick, remember, for a game. That New Orleans game, Jaden got sacked 8 times. 8 times in the New Orleans game without Biotish in the game. I think it was Michael Dieter who started at center that day. Look, they've improved their offensive line by adding Laramie Tunsil. Clearly, Josh Connerly, we hope, is also a significant, upgrade to what they've had. They need Cosme back, and they need him back sooner rather than later and healthy. There's no doubt they are moving away from Allegretti. Coleman's going to take his spot. Who will start at right guard before Cosme comes back? Probably Allegretti, I'm guessing. That will be one of those things we'll watch to see what that offensive line looks like. Maybe Connerly's not ready to go opening day. He is a rookie, and Andrew Wiley ends up being the starting right tackle. Or they split snaps like they were doing with Coleman last year until he's comfortable in being the full-time right tackle. Let's go to Lap. Lap, what's the big story? What's the top story about this football team since it's not quarterback for the first time in decades? God, just yeah, go ahead, Lap.
I'm gonna say offense. Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm gonna say offensive line. I'm gonna say running back as well as receiver. I want to see if the receiver. Yeah, I want to see if the who steps up, and that Noah Brown thing is kind of concerning me. So I guess we'll see. Maybe Luke McCaffrey will step up. And then edge rusher, man. I want to see if we're going to get some pressure on the quarterback on the defensive side. But
you're doing the same thing our previous caller did. You don't have a number one conversation. You got a lot of, topics. And by the way, that's good. We're talking about, the situation that's being built around a superstar quarterback. And there are a lot of, all of these areas that you just touched on. It does speak to the fact that we're not, overly confident about the rest of the roster, outside of a guy like Terry, outside of a guy like Tunsil, or a guy like, I think, Frankie Louvu and Bobby Wagner. But, there's a lot to, learn about what the 2025 team and supporting cast around Jaden's going to look like. I think the good news, Lap, is we have some good players and we've got some good coaching, especially on offense.
Yeah, definitely. Let me ask you this, Kevin. Do you think this team is better than they were a year ago, just on paper right now? Do you think Jaden has what he needs to succeed? And do you think this team can make the playoffs? Again, do you think they're a better team? Because we didn't really have much, and he did a lot with less. I'm curious to see if we build around him the right way. I'm really want to see. I'm excited for the season. I can't wait, man. I can't
me
wait.
neither. I'm with you on that. I can't wait for real games and to talk about real games. But no, look, going into this season, obviously this is a better team than we thought it was last year because we know we now have an answer on the quarterback. Now, with respect to everybody else, I think it's better because I think the offensive line, certainly on paper, adding Tunsil makes it a much better offensive line. You've added a truly high-level, borderline, elite pass-blocking left tackle. It's a very important position in the game. I think Debo is he's got to prove it, but in a contract year, I like that as an added weapon offensively. They need Terry, no doubt about that. Defensively, I think corner looks like a better room than it did this time last year, and they're bigger up front, but I don't know how that really plays out production-wise. I don't know how that will manifest itself. I mean, there are a lot of those, topics. To me, again, after understanding quarterback is not a conversation, they have to, big picture, Washington ends up in the Super Bowl. How did that happen? Well, we had another incredible year offensively, and they got much better defensively. That last part, getting better defensively, is crucial to the upcoming season. Michael, what's the number one conversation, since it's not quarterback, heading into 2025?
Hey, how you doing, Kevin? To
What's
me,
up,
it's the running backs. I think we need an elite running back, someone who can give us 1,500 yards. The same thing that put Philly over the top. When Philly got Saquon, that put them over the top to win the Super Bowl. Derrick Henry went to the Ravens. That gave Lamar his best season ever, statistically. I think an elite back would take a lot of pressure off Jaden, and it would make us an elite offense, man. If somebody's getting 1,300 yards a season, that does it for me, man. I can rest easy knowing that we have an elite back. And that's somebody who's coming in there getting 700, 800 yards. That's not going to do it. We need someone who's an elite running back. I'll take an elite running back over receiver at this point right now. Thanks, Kevin.
That was a conversation we had before the offseason began. Do you want another – if they only add one true dynamic playmaker to the offense, do you want it to be a running back or a wide receiver? Look, they added Debo. I think at his best, if he's healthy, if he's available, he is a dynamic playmaker. He's going to help. I'm with you, though. I've wanted something else at running back. The idea of having something that resembles a top-tier back standing next to Jaden in the backfield would be that's an offense that's difficult, really difficult to stop. And it was difficult to stop without it last year. But they don't have that as far as we know this year. But maybe the offensive line upgrade, if it ends up being an upgrade, and it would appear that it would be, maybe that reveals the running back room to be much better than we think it is right now. Or maybe a guy like Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. A lot of you have a lot of faith in what he is. I'll believe it when I see it in an actual game. But imagine they found a back like in Isaiah Pacheco they found in the 7th round, the Chiefs did, and he ends up being the answer. And he's dynamic, and he's explosive, and he's versatile. That'd be incredible. Because can you imagine what it would look like? Forget Barkley. How about if you just had Bijan Robinson in the backfield? How about if you had Jahmyr Gibbs in the backfield? How about if you just had somebody like Josh Jacobs or Kyron Williams? Maybe not top tier, but that second tier, of backs. And I certainly think that Brian Robinson Jr. is capable of being a good back, but not an elite level back. What if you had Jonathan Taylor in the backfield? The guy that Carolina ended up paying last year midway through the season, he was having a great season. A guy like Chuba Hubbard, a guy like Bucky Irving, who Tampa found. I mean, I like the guy in Cincinnati, Chase Brown, who I think they found in the 4th or 5th round. He ended up getting hurt, but I loved him coming out of Illinois. He turned into a really good back. Imagine, though, somebody like that in the backfield. Jason in Laurel. Jason, go ahead.
Hey, Kev, thanks for taking the show. Glad you made a good recovery there. So my number one story for this season still sort of contains Jaden, but kind of on the outside looking in. What I think is the most important story to me is the relationship between Jaden Daniels and Cliff Kingsbury. And I tell you what, I disagree with you. I don't think this is his last year. I think he's going to stay around, and I hopefully longer than shorter. These two guys really get along. Both of them have incredible work ethics. Kingsbury was drafted by New England while Brady was there, so he's seen what Brady's like in the room. I think he sees some of that in JD5. The work ethic that Murray had, I think maybe soured him enough that he took a step away from the NFL for a year and kind of like, hey, what am I going to do? I think he's found the guy in JD5 that is kind of wired the same way he's wired. It's all about work, all about studying and putting the work in. And they seem to get along. Steve Kingsbury himself has said, you're going to have to drag me away from this guy. I'm going to be here for a while.
Right.
I also think he gets along well with Quinn. And I've heard you mention this many times, that the team needs somebody that sort of knows the history. This organization has had a habit of letting really high-quality coaches escape them. And I think it stops now, Kevin. I think we keep Cliff long-term. I think the relationship continues to burn. And I don't know if they hit him with an assistant head coach title or they promise him the team with DQ's done. I mean, I don't know any of that. But I don't think he's going anywhere else because I think he's comfortable, and I think he knows Jaden knows his worth, and he knows Jaden's worth. And I think the team responds to him. So that's my number one story. Love to hear your comments on it.
Yeah, I think a guy like Cliff Kingsbury, who is a competitor and probably, and I read from that story that this guy Tyler Dunn wrote last week about Cliff Kingsbury, that, he got this label of being a bit too Hollywood, being too much of just, a coordinator, not a head coach, etc. I think this guy's a phenomenal communicator. Players seem to love him. The combination of a really strong offensive head coach and a really good quarterback, I think that's what he would be looking for. So, you're talking about, a situation where, I'm trying to think, let's just say New Orleans ends up with New Orleans just changed their coaches. But, you get a team next year that ends up landing on Arch Manning or, a big-time quarterback, and they're looking for a new head coach. There could be a situation that's just too tantalizing for him to walk away from as a competitor. And I think these guys always would, I don't think they dream of being a lifelong offensive coordinator. I think right now it's been very easy for him to stay here because A, he's got an incredible, quarterback to work with. And B, remember, he's getting paid like a head coach. Arizona's still paying him, as a head coach. I think, I forget, doesn't it go through 27 or 26? I think there might be 2 more years of him getting paid like a head coach. I'll go look that up because that's important, he may not speak to that, but the fact that he's not making offensive coordinator money, but he's making head coach money, kind of makes it easy to stick around and be a coordinator as well. He is still being paid by the Cardinals through 2027 as a head coach. They had that 3-year, $18 million contract with Washington to be the offensive coordinator, but basically the Cardinals are then paying the difference between what he signed that contract extension for in Arizona in 2022 through the 2027 season. So there is that. All right. Good conversation. Chelsea Janes joined me yesterday on my podcast to talk about the Dave Martinez situation. And these next 3 games against Colorado may be a determining factor in whether or not he's the manager by the end of the week. You'll hear that conversation next. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com.
this was a tough one. Again, another game we lost, by a couple of runs. But we got to keep battling, got to keep going. We got to stay positive, come back tomorrow and do it again tomorrow.
Dave Martinez last night following the Nats 6-4 loss to the woeful Colorado Rockies. They had a 4-3 lead going into the ninth. Kyle Finnegan, who had not given up a home run in his first 25 appearances this year, gave up 2 home runs in the ninth. Can't make this up right now. The Nats are losers of 9 in a row. And of course, what happened over the weekend with Dave Martinez after they had lost to the Marlins on Saturday, saying, being asked about sort of the production, the offensive production specifically, and he said, it's never on coaching. It's never the coaches. That got a lot of attention, of course. And this 4-game stretch against Colorado, the worst team that Major League Baseball has seen in many years, at least through this point in the season. What could be coming if they lose 3 out of 4? They've already lost the first of 4. I had Chelsea Janes, who's covered the Nats and covered Major League Baseball for years in this town for the Washington Post, on my podcast yesterday. This was before the game last night, but some interesting stuff from Chelsea in talking about the Dave Martinez situation. Joining me right now, Chelsea Janes, longtime reporter for the Washington Post, covered the team forever. She now is the paper's national baseball reporter at Chelsea_Janes on X on Twitter. You heard what Davey said on Saturday, and you've just written about it in the Post. You'll get to read that online if you're a Post subscriber today, in the paper tomorrow, I'm sure. Where did it stem from, do you think? Was it just frustration in the moment after losing a 7th straight game, or do you think that there is some concern about job security?
I think it was largely frustration, but I also think there is a little bit of tension here with, his option on his deal needs to be picked up in July for him to be under contract next year. And, July is coming quickly and results are not, improving. So I think it's a bunch of things. Obviously, you can't speak for him, but I do think there's a lot of frustration there because I think, like all of us, he's watching these guys do the same stuff over again and kind of wondering, like, what do I have to do to get you to understand that we have to change things?
What was the reaction in the clubhouse? And then if from Mike Rizzo and ownership?
I wasn't in the clubhouse the day after, but my colleagues who were said that they noticed a lot more front office presence in the clubhouse Sunday morning than normal. Mike Rizzo's not normally in there, certainly not kind of openly talking to players, but he was down there, and so were some other front office folks, just kind of having conversations that we don't usually see. So what that means, I don't know. Maybe they got a new coffee machine, but I doubt it. I think it's probably related, and just kind of hearing from people around the team, it sounds like, Riz went in there to kind of, clean things up, whatever that means, just to everybody's good. They probably are, but we did hear there was frustration from players in the immediate aftermath, kind of just wondering, like, okay, if it's not about us, what are you talking about? Because it certainly seemed like there was a little punt of accountability there from Davey, and certainly more of a punt than we've really heard from him before.
Chelsea, what kind of job is he doing?
That's a great question. I don't know. I think we, by all sort of measures of a human being, he is a good person, a kind person who cares about the guys, and that does matter. What I don't know is if they are underachieving or overachieving relative to what they should be doing. I mean, they're underachieving relative to what Davey and Riz and others said they should be doing this year. But we don't know who these guys are. We don't know who Robert Hassel should be. We don't know what Dylan Cruz, should be. We know what they think they are. But, with another manager, would this roster be in the same place? Maybe, maybe not. It's so hard to say, and has been hard to say for such a long time, because you're not looking at guarantees in that lineup. You're looking at people who either have to get better and then the lineup will get better, or who are kind of there as placeholders. And so, is Davey the problem? How many wins is he responsible for? I don't know. And I think that's part of why it's so hard to sort of pull the Nats out of this, because there's not one clear problem or one clear thing where you say, Davey's really asleep on the job, because I don't think that's the takeaway from this year necessarily at all.
It was just a week and a half ago. They were like 2 or 3 games below 500. They were scoring a bunch of runs, against Arizona, and I forget who else during that stretch. They were clearly more explosive from an offensive standpoint than they were this time last year. And now they're in the midst of an 8-game losing streak with 3 bad losses to Miami, a bad team. I mean, things change in sports. We understand this, but what were people thinking a week and a half ago?
I think everyone around the Nationals can agree that there was a world in which they would maybe contend for a wild card spot this year. And as of a week ago, that world still existed. It kind of still exists now. If they make a big run, they're back in it. And all of that would be really good. But I think what people know around the team, and certainly everyone who watches them regularly, is that they're just not as sure a thing as they should be after this long of a rebuild. We shouldn't be wondering who they are. We shouldn't be kind of living week to week. This should be a team that can be consistent. And yeah, with young guys, you're going to have inconsistencies, but it just seems like they haven't taken the big leap. You're not sure that they're going to be better this year than last year. And I think, frankly, put in those terms, it's unacceptable given what, Davey, Riz, and others said were the expectations for this year.
I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, prior to these comments out of, let's just say, frustration on Saturday, the default for most fans would be to blame ownership for not spending enough money, not giving Mike Rizzo enough resources. It just seemed rarely did that trickle down to the manager, who, by the way, has a losing record as a manager. I mean, there is 2019 to stand on, obviously, a magical season that ended up in a World Series. But now we're talking about the manager and the manager's job security. Did that just change because he made these comments Saturday, or do you think it's still fair to start with ownership?
I think it's always fair to start with ownership. And I think with the Nationals, it's always fair to talk about Mike Rizzo and Davey in the context of what they've been given. I think it would be unfair not to, right? This is not, the last time that they had, that Davey managed a team that had kind of all its stars and wasn't trying to cut payroll, they won the World Series. Ever since then, they've been trying to trim, and that has shown. But I don't think Davey was on the hot seat before this weekend. I don't know that he's on it now. But I will say that what he did was sort of bring to the surface something that we really hadn't seen. We hadn't seen anyone getting frustrated. We hadn't seen anyone say, okay, James Wood has been great, but what the heck else is going on here? What's the direction of this team? And he didn't say that, but he sort of revealed that, he wishes some things were going different, and players being frustrated by those comments, reveals that they're frustrated about something, and there's a disconnect there. And I think all of that existed. These things don't come out of nowhere. I think obviously Davey had been frustrated for a little while. We just kind of know from being around that there are guys who, they wish would make better progress, and there are players who sometimes aren't sure kind of, where Davey stands, and that exists in every clubhouse. But I think Davey kind of just called attention to his own frustrations, and therefore kind of reminded everyone that, look, this should be probably going differently. You're not frustrated when things are trending the right way. An 8-game losing streak doesn't feel so bad when you kind of know that in the grand scheme of things, you're going the right direction. And I just don't think anyone there feels certain that they are anything more than they are right now, without some significant change.
Without the 2019 World Series, I mean, the record is not good. They've finished basically in dead last in the National League 3 out of the last 5 years, 4th place the other 2 years. In most organizations, he wouldn't be the manager right now, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, I don't know that that's necessarily conventional wisdom in that case might not necessarily be wisdom at all. I think we've seen, the Pirates and Rockies look pretty silly scapegoating their managers when the rosters they built are not good. And, I think at times in the last 2 years, that would have been all it was if they had decided Dave Martinez was the problem, because he frankly didn't have anything to work with.
Right.
Now I think there's some. I mean, James Wood is really, really good. He's Juan Soto part 2, and it feels like it doesn't change the equation for them at all. You know, they feel like they're going to win the same number of games maybe as last year. They're just going to look better doing it. And I think that's where the problem comes in. If you look at that guy and say, okay, if everyone kind of comes along and CJ is coming along and James Wood's coming along and McKenzie's leading the league in strikeouts, this team should be winning, or at least closer to it than they are. And they're not. And so I think that's why you can start looking at Dave Martinez and saying, okay, there's actual talent here. What's not clicking? And does that mean he's a problem? I don't think there's any one problem. So, but it definitely just kind of makes you look at things with I think, earned scrutiny.
All right, let's net it out on Davey here by just asking you, because they play Colorado the next 4 games. Colorado, for those of you who don't know, is not only the worst team in baseball, there's not a close second. They are 14-57 on the season. They are terrible. Is this a big series? Is he in jeopardy if they say, you know, were to lose 3 or 4? Could that be it by the end of the week or midweek?
You know, I don't know. I would say I think it feels bigger than any series we've had in quite some time for that reason. I think, you know, a bad showing here is going to continue a downward spiral that has escalated pretty quickly, I think. You know, I think those comments mattered in that they just called attention to their mediocrity, kind of. So I think I don't know how hot the seat is. I don't know how hot it should be, but I do know that if you're losing 3 or 4 to the Rockies after what they just did this weekend, that it's going to be closer than it's ever been to something changing, and probably should be at that point.
Is there an obvious replacement on the team somewhere?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
Sometimes the solution,
problem, right?
Sometimes the solution, if it's difficult, sort of tells you where the answer is going to come, even if they lose 3 out of 4.
I think that's right. And I think the fact that you don't look around and say this guy would help in the manager seat probably tells you a lot too, right? That there's just so much more going on, because a manager can't make that roster better. You know, he can't hasten the development of Hassel and Cruz and guys that, you know, they probably need to be better sooner if they're going to win this year. You know, there's other problems. And one of them, the problem that'll always be there, is that if they're not willing to spend on quality players, they are not going to win, because they are not built to do this internally. They're just not built to do it all internally. That was fine, you know, last time around, because they were able to go out and get pieces to supplement what they could do. But if they can't do that, I just don't think they're built to do it themselves. And that's, you know, that's a huge problem.
All right, let's switch subjects real quickly. Tell us about the calling up of Brady House, where he'll play, what they're expecting from him.
No, I think Brady House, it's time. You know, he's had a really strong season in AAA. He's going to swing and miss a lot. That's always been the problem. So he'll kind of fit right in. That doesn't really scare them. He's got a lot of power from the right side. He's a really energetic and competitive guy. So I think that, you know, is only a positive thing. And I think he'll play as much third as his bat shows he can. I mean, they would love to hand him the position. I don't know if he'll be totally ready for that, but I think he'll get a shot, and, you know, maybe he'll be kind of an injection of life, because, you know, he is a reminder that there are other good young players here. And, you know, if they can just get everybody in the same direction, you know, there's talent to be had there. There's talent to be made something of.
Another first-round pick has pitched well recently. Will Cade Cavalli find his way to the bigs soon?
I think so. They've always been, you know, pretty clear with him, you know, even to the point of joking around in spring training, that they're going to play it slow. They're not going to let him come back until, you know, midway through the summer, so that he doesn't have to handle a ton of innings coming off injury. So I think it was a plan to kind of get to June or July and then bring him back. I think everyone in the organization still has faith that he's, you know, somebody that's going to contribute to the rotation. And, you know, that's something else to look forward to there. That guy coming back, if he's as good as they thought he once was, then, you know, that'll help a lot too.
Is Mackenzie Gore a legitimate Cy Young candidate in the National League?
He's definitely close. I think he will get votes. I don't know if he can keep up with some of the bigger guys out there, although it's been, you know, a little bit of an inconsistent season with some of the guys at the top. But, you know, leading the league in strikeouts is no joke. I mean, he's really good. Players think he's really good after they face him. I just think he needs to be a little more dominant, maybe, you know, hold teams down a little bit more than he does to kind of jump into that conversation seriously. But I also might be harder on him than people who are voting and don't see every start and analyze it, to the minute like we do.
Well, Skeens is a heavy favorite right now, but Mackenzie Gore's in the mix of 5th or 6th among odds right now. But he, as you mentioned, he leads not just the National League, but he leads all big leaguers in strikeouts with 119. Last one. Do Gore, Wood, and CJ Abrams all become all-stars this year? All three?
I think they should. I don't know how Wood and Gore aren't. I think Abrams might be on the bubble, but probably should make it again. So I think all three should be all stars. Whether they will be or not is often a more complicated process than that.
Thanks for doing this. Hope you're well. Good to catch up. Thanks, Chelsea.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Chelsea Janes from my podcast yesterday. Again, the Nats lost last night to Colorado. Brady House, by the way, last night in his debut, 0 for 3 with a walk and a strikeout. The Nats and the Rockies again tonight. This will be a very interesting week if the Nats can't figure out a way to get healthy against the Colorado Rockies. And last night, they lost. That's 9 in a row now. You turn that into 10 in a row, 11 in a row with, the last 5 or 6 coming against the Marlins and the Rockies. I would expect, just based on optics, a change. We'll see. All right. When we come back, the NBA draft is a week from tomorrow night. The Wizards have 2 picks, and the latest ESPN mock draft has them selecting a player that I really hope they don't select. More on that next.
All right, the Oklahoma City Thunder took a 3-2 lead in the NBA Finals last night by a score of 120 to 109. The Pacers cut the lead to 2 points in the fourth quarter, and it was all OKC from there with a 21-8 run to close out the game. Jalen Williams put up 40 points on 56% shooting. The Stanley Cup Final is tonight, and the Cup is in the building. The Panthers are coming home with a chance to close out the Edmonton Oilers tonight at 8 p.m. on TNT. And the Nats, they fall to the Rockies after entering the ninth with a 4-3 lead. Kyle Finnegan gives up his first home run of the season to tie the game. Then Mickey Maniac hits the go-ahead home run. Kyle Finnegan's second given up of the year. The Nats fall 6-4 and extend their losing streak to 9 games. They'll continue their series versus the Rockies tonight. First pitch is at 6:45. Nats on deck with Charlie and Dave at 6:15 on 106.7 The Fan. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
So a week from tomorrow night, the NBA draft takes place. The NBA Finals will be over either Thursday night or Sunday night. And the Wizards have to draft well. I mean, their only chance of being a contender down the road is to use all of these draft choices that are coming, fast and furious by way of trade and, by the way, positioning in the draft. They got very unlucky, obviously, in the lottery this year. Dropping all the way to 6th, even though they had the second worst record in the NBA. That's a tough break, but they got to make it pay off. In this morning's NBA section at ESPN.com, they have the latest mock draft from Jonathan Giovanni and Jeremy Wu. And they've got the Wizards at number 6 selecting Ace Bailey from Rutgers. I think this would be a massive mistake. I'll admit going into this that we don't know anything. These kids are so young. Bailey played 1 year at Rutgers with Dylan Harper, both as freshmen. They've essentially for about a year and a half been predicted to be the number 2 and number 3 picks in the NBA draft. Dylan Harper most likely will be the number 2 pick after Cooper Flagg. Bailey, though, drops to 6 in this latest mock draft. And they've got Ace Bailey going to the Wizards. Ace Bailey is 6'7", 6'8", super skin, big wingspan, can play a lot of different positions, can play, small forward, can play actually in the backcourt if you really needed it. I watched him a bunch this year in the Big Ten. Playing for Rutgers. Rutgers was supposed to be a lot better than they turned out to be before the season started, relying on these 2 freshmen. The game's now an older game. College basketball is, with all of the transfers and teams getting older, and you see older teams tend to win a little bit more. Rutgers was not ready for prime time, certainly not the Big Ten. They had a rough season. There was a game in which Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper came to College Park and played Maryland. This was in early February. The Terps had a really good team this year, no doubt about it. And they beat Rutgers 90-81. In the game, Derek Queen emasculated Ace Bailey, 2 freshman players. It was a beatdown. Now, what we found out after the game is that Ace Bailey apparently was sick. He tapped out in the game, went to the bench, didn't come back into the game, ended up with 4 points on 2 of 4 from the field. Derek Queen had one of the better games he had all season long, 29 points, 15 rebounds, 5 assists, a steal, a block shot. He was dominant in his matchup with Ace Bailey. It wasn't matched up specifically with him the entire time, but Ace Bailey, I remember making a mental note. This guy's not the number 2 pick in the draft. You don't tap out of a game like this. The game was competitive. It was, Maryland didn't pull away by a big margin. In that game, Dylan Harper was firing away. Ace Bailey went to the bench with the sniffles. And I made a mental note. I don't want him. I don't want a guy that's capable of doing that. Now, there were games this year in which he was outstanding. He had a game, I think it was against Northwestern at some point this year. I think he had 39. I'm looking it up right now in his game log. January 29th at Northwestern, he had 37. He was 13 of 25 for 8 from behind the 3-point line. He also had a 30-point game against Penn State. Look, he beat up on some teams that didn't have bigger guys. He had a 39-point game early in the season at Indiana. I did not see that one. But the lasting impression of what he did at Maryland bothered me. And now you've got some interesting write-ups about Ace Bailey. This is the write-up, ESPN.com. Bailey's pre-draft workout strategy has perplexed some observers, as he is yet to conduct a single known workout to date, having declined invitations from several teams within his draft range. Sources say Bailey's camp has informed interested teams that they believe he is a top 3 player in the draft, but also seeks a clear pathway to stardom perhaps feeling comfortable that a team will trade up to get him at number 3 or number 4 should he drop. Some teams question whether Bailey has received assurances of being selected by a team currently outside of the top 5 to a situation deemed more advantageous from a geographic and playing time perspective. That might mean the Wizards. Bailey is scheduled to conduct a workout with the 76ers later this week, but it's unclear if he plans to visit any other teams at this stage. Should the Sixers pass on him, he could very well slide to number 6 or number 7, 2 teams in Washington and New Orleans that are said to be highly intrigued with the 18-year-old's talent, and both situations in which there would be plenty of minutes to be had. You don't know anything about these 18-year-olds. I get it. You know, they mature physically and mentally, sometimes 4 or 5 years after they are drafted. He may turn out to be a great player. That's just a lasting image. And Derek Queen in that game, Derek Queen, they've got going 12 to Chicago. I would certainly consider taking Derek Queen at 6. He's a basketball player. He is so skilled. I think he's the most skilled big guy in the entire class. I think he'll be a great pick and roll, a great pick and pop guy, a great passer from the high post, from the low post, a great rebounder. I would take a guy like Derek Queen and roll the dice with him. They also have 2 other picks in this draft. They have number 18 in the draft. The mock draft has them selecting Asen Newell from Georgia. They also have number 40 in the draft, and this mock draft has them taking the star of the Auburn team that made it, deep into the tournament, Janai Broom. 3 swings at it next week, Wednesday and Thursday, for the Wizards to try to land on a player that I don't think they've landed on yet through these last couple of drafts. I don't think that Sarr, Carrington, George, at this point are the potential answers in terms of, a superstar player. Time will tell. It's early. That's it for today. Back tomorrow. Chris is next.